Thank you for joining this session. All right, if you could go here, and Adam, right now you're going to be the only one that's actually doing this activity. But if you could go to student.desmos.com and type in this code. And then, Adam, as you're going through this activity, also think about how students would answer the question. So answer it as students and also as a math teacher, just to get the idea of some of the things that are happening. And I'm going to still continue to share my screen so that you can also take a look at what's happening on my teacher dashboard, because there are some things that you're really not going to see what's happening because it's a teacher directed thing, not necessarily a student directed thing. So pay attention to what you're seeing as a student, but also what is appearing on the dashboard.
I don't like looking at the dashboard. It makes me nervous now.
It's to get your mind to start thinking about the different things that I've done to make things appear on here.
Okay. Thank you for choosing a topic I can complete.
You're welcome. Well, actually, where this even came from is, so this is an activity that one of my high school teachers is using in their Algebra 1 class. But if you notice, it says that it's a pre-assessment. So what she ended up doing is, are you familiar with the VDOE quick checks?
I'm familiar with them, but I honestly haven't been using them.
No, that's totally fine. But that's where some of this came from, is she wanted to find a way to pre-assess her students on what they already know about slope and y-intercepts, because they did learn it in middle school. And so some of these questions come from the VDOE quick checks. I mean, I did go in and kind of edit them and adjust them to make them look like Desmos screens. So these originally did directly come from those quick checks, but she wanted to use those as a pre-assessment, which is probably why you have this knowledge, is because in middle school at some point they learn this stuff, and so she's assessing what her students already know.
Okay.
So if you notice, there are different things that are happening on the dashboard. So I want to explain how I did this, why I did this, and also just like other little things that are happening on all of these screens. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to this side of it. So this is within the editing, so I can show you all the different things that are happening. All right, so on slide 1, while I did set it up so that there would be a warning for some reason, I also had some other things that were happening. So when I preview this slide, I start with a cover text. So here, students don't see what's actually happening on the slide until they see this first bit of information. And so this is just something that I choose to do from time to time, because instead of having a whole bunch of slides in an activity where one slide might just say, you are going to do this, I just put it as a cover text. So on slide 1, they see in section 1, on slides 1 through 5, you're going to complete questions that check your ability to identify the slope of a line. So I also want you to keep that in mind, that that's the point of the first 5 slides. And then I say, okay, and I'm still on slide 1, and I can actually see the material. So how I did this, and this is a separate CL from all of the different components. This CL comes from the top left of the page. And so this one section of computation layer sometimes it was originally a little bit frustrating for me, because it's the only place where when you start to type things, it doesn't give you all of the options of things you can do. And that's something that we'll see on different components that are happening, but I knew that this was something that was available, so that's why I knew how to code it. But so the coding on this says cover text. So basically that's like the cover of the screen before the students actually start interacting with anything. And then I put in quotation marks the directions I wanted to give them. All right, now by default, this button says OK, and when I click OK, that's when I can go into it. But you can change what that button says if you want to. So for example, I just know that I'm supposed to type in cover button label. And it doesn't, again, show up for you. You just have to know that you're supposed to do that. And then in quotation marks, maybe I want to change what the button says, and I'm going to change it to say, let's begin. And then when I preview it, now the button says what I wanted to say. All right, but now the real meat of this slide was what was happening on the dashboard. So if you notice, and these are some people that did it yesterday, I have a bunch of ones that were checked correct, but then I have some that have warnings. And if you notice, the warning says this graph represents an undefined slope. So why this happened? The question was select the two graphs that appear to show a line with a slope of 0. And me as the teacher, I'm setting up the warning because there's a specific wrong answer that I'm looking for. And I want to know how many students are selecting the answers that are the misconception I am aware of. So if they're confusing 0 slope and no slope, I want to be aware of that. If they're just choosing positive or negative, great. An X mark would just appear. So the way I did this is within this checkbox, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 choices, and 7 and 8 are the ones with the undefined slope. So within this component, this is where the warning is going to come from because it's within this component that students are doing something incorrectly. So my warning says when this is selected, so what I was mentioning before about words popping up when you know what you kind of want to say. So like when I start to type warning, it appears for me and I can just click that. So this is what you do to make this little warning symbol actually show up in the dashboard. And at that point, you just start typing what it is that you want the warning to be about. So when this, and I use the word this because it's within this component, on future slides, you'll see when I have to state something else. So when this is selected, choice 7, so when a student checks choice 7 and in this component what is selected as choice 8, the message I want to say is this graph represents an undefined slope. Otherwise, there's not going to be a warning. So when I preview this, so you can see what's happening in the dashboard, if I choose a 0 slope and a 0 slope, this is correct because those were the correct answers that were marked. If they choose a negative slope, an X is going to appear. If they choose a positive slope, an X is going to appear. Because again, me as a teacher, I don't care if it's positive and negative, like it's wrong. But I want to know that they chose an undefined slope. So if I choose both undefined slopes, it's going to be a warning. All right, now you don't necessarily have to keep it to choosing both undefined slopes. Maybe they only chose one undefined slope and you want to be aware of that. Instead of saying when choice 7 and choice 8 are selected, you could say or. So if just one of these was selected, a warning would appear. So when I preview that slide, they choose it once and I already have a warning. Even if they choose all of these other things, I'm still going to have a warning appear because they chose an undefined slope. All right, are there questions about anything I went over on that slide?
Nope. It's better to say or instead of the and, just for the sake of as long as they do one.
Right, and it's one of those things where like it depends on what you want as a teacher.
Right.
Like
Okay.
for me, it's like as long as you did it once, like I know you're choosing an undefined slope. Now, in some types of questions where like maybe you don't have quite so many options, so like maybe there's only 4 options, you might want to say they chose choice 7 and none of the other ones. But because there's 8 choices, that's just a lot of coding that I didn't really feel like doing. As long as like they chose an undefined slope, I know they have probably confused 0 and undefined. But the fact that I put that warning up, it alerts me to check out what that student did and to either give them written feedback, maybe send a couple of kids to a breakout room so I can work just with the students who made that misconception. All right, on the second slide, you'll notice there are dots and there's an X. So all of these that have dots, they actually were correct, but I want to explain why we don't see a check mark appear. So on slide 2, when I choose Jesse, that's wrong. But then also in this text box, I've given a sentence starter because they chose Jesse. So sometimes students need sentence starters because they're not great at beginning to explain their thinking about something. When I chose Tia, who is correct, a dot appears. Okay, so the reason why a dot appears when they're correct instead of a check is because of the fact that there's this extra explanation piece. And the reason why that happens is for all of the components where students are interacting with it, Desmos thinks it has to check for something. So Desmos is checking to see if they got this correct, but students also have to explain their thinking. Desmos has no way to actually go in and check a student explanation. The program just knows that it's a piece that the teacher needs to look at. So the reason why a dot appears is the dot is there because they chose the correct multiple choice answer, but there's still something else on the screen that you need to look at. So you as the teacher, no matter what, you need to look at what it is that they've explained. Desmos can't do that. So anytime you have a screen where students have to explain something using text, Desmos will never be able to give a check mark, only a dot. So the CL that I wanted to show on this is, first of all, when you check this right here, when you check the correct answer, that's what makes a dot or an X appear. If I don't choose a correct answer, it's going to show a dot regardless because I haven't told Desmos what's right and what's wrong. But once I check that Tia is the one that's correct, now I know that the dot means that they're right, the X means they're wrong. So you do have to check what the correct answer is. All right, so now if you notice, there's no explanation box. So what ends up happening is when they click on one of these options, that's when this is going to appear. So I want to show you how I made this appear, but also how I got this sentence starter going. So that actually appeared, and forgive me because I forgot what I did on this screen. I didn't put in another component. I just had them asked to explain their answer. So Desmos automatically is going to first get them to choose an answer, and then once they choose an answer, the explanation box is going to appear. But I started that sentence for them. So that coding, whether it's in a multiple choice, whether it's in a checkbox, or whether it's in just a text input period, you can start a sentence for them, and that's using the coding initial text. So if I start typing initial text, it automatically pops up. So I have to tell Desmos all of the different things that I want to have happen. So when this is selected 1, they chose Jesse. So I think Jesse is correct because, end quotation marks. When this is selected option 2, so if they chose Tia, I'm letting them start the sentence with, I think Tia is correct because, and then just the way the coding works, anytime you're giving a when statement of when this happens, when this happens, when this happens, when this happens, you always have to end with otherwise. And a lot of the time we're not saying anything because in this case, they chose option 1, something's going to happen. If they chose option 2, something's going to happen. There's no other possibility. So with my otherwise is just going to be close quotation marks. So again, I chose Tia. So the sentence starts, I think Tia is correct because. If I choose Jesse, I think Jesse is correct because. All right, are there any questions on this slide?
If you don't have any pre-text listed in there, will it allow the student to submit nothing?
Yeah, so if I...
Will that leave a check or an X on the dashboard though?
Yeah, so the check in the X, or in this case, the dot in the X, just comes from the fact that they chose a correct answer. So if I didn't put,
finishing the problem.
Like, I'm going to put a little pound symbol in front of each of these because that makes the coding disappear. So like, let's say there was nothing there. So right now, nothing's happening. It's all grayed out. If they choose Jesse, I'm going to know they were wrong. If they chose Tia, I'm going to know they're correct. But I still have to go look at this screen to see if they explained anything. Desmos won't tell me that they left it blank. And that's why that dot is appearing, is it's saying, yes, they're right, but there's still something else you need to look at. So I'm going to put this back. And again, just because we're giving them initial text, it doesn't mean they're going to do anything with it. There's a possibility that they could choose Tia and they could say, I think Tia is correct because, and submit and think they're done. So anytime there's text in there, you need to go back and see if they actually wrote anything. Desmos won't tell you if they wrote anything.
Okay.
All right, on slide 3, so slide 3 either came up as a check or an X because this was a basic multiple choice question, but what happened in the CL is a little bit beyond just basic. All right, so I'm going to take a couple things out so that you can see what would happen if there was no coding in here. All right, now, there was something that I did with the bounds. So if you notice right now, it's a standard window going from -10 to 10 and -10 to 10. We've got these 3 lines, which has a positive slope. So C is wrong, B is a dot, A is wrong. But if you notice, I made a check mark appear. All right, that is because when you're going through, the only time you cannot make the dot be a thing and you want it to be a check mark is text. If you notice, kids are not putting any text in here. But right now, it's a dot because Desmos thinks that it has to look at the graph for student work. So some of the components, Desmos thinks it needs to look at it for student information, but we want to prevent that from happening. So for example, if there's a graph component, or if there's a sketch component, or if there is a table component, or if there is a math input component, if none of those components deal with the student answer, there's one thing we can do to make Desmos not try to check it for work. So that's where in the CL of the graph, this line where it says read only, true, I'm going to erase it and start from the beginning so you can see. I don't want Desmos to look at the graph for an answer. So the coding that we put there is read only, and we say true. And so now when I preview the graph, B is correct as a check mark, A is still wrong, C is still wrong. So if you want a check mark to appear, but it's not, it's because the graph needs that read only text. Also, when it came to the bounds, this is kind of something where you don't have to do this. It's just something that I like to do just to make sure that kids are seeing the screen that I want them to see. And so the coding for that is bounds. And then I wanted to make the bounds go from -5 to 5 and -5 to 5 instead of -10 to 10. So now when I preview it, now I'm seeing the minor grid lines and I'm seeing a smaller window. So it's not something you have to do. It's just something that I like to do. All right, are there questions on this screen?
That bounds thing is the coolest thing I've seen ever.
Yeah, it's awesome because like when you don't do it, so I'm gonna gray it out again, is before I knew how to do that, I used to get really frustrated because I would see it like this and then I would preview it the way a student would, and sometimes like this view and the student view aren't the same. So I would go in here and I would go to settings and I would I would start changing things. I would figure out, you know, how do I make it look the way I want it to look? And I'd still have to preview it. And it's just like, it just got super frustrating. And then I learned about bounds. And then it doesn't matter what it looks like on this screen because at the end of the day, like they're going to see what you want them to see. And sometimes that makes it easier when you're placing things on the graph.
Definitely.
All right. Anything else on slide 3 that you have questions about? All right. So if you recall, on the very first screen, I said on slides 5, you're going to complete questions that check your ability to identify the slope of a line. So this is where me as the teacher, you know, now thinking about virtual learning and thinking about the fact that students might not be turning their camera on, so I can't see their face to notice if they understand something or not. Students might not be putting anything in the chat because they don't feel comfortable saying they don't understand something. Students might not be unmuting themselves to ask questions. So how can I use Desmos to find ways for kids to communicate with me where they don't have to have other students see that they don't understand something? So that's where this 5th screen is going to come into play of, I know that slides 1 through 4, I'm dealing with slope. And I want to know how a kid feels about their ability to do slope before they go on to do something else. But I don't want them to have to verbally tell me or put something in the chat because, again, they might not feel comfortable doing that. So slide 5, I created a reflection. So if you notice on my slide 5, I have a bunch of dots and then I have a warning. So I know because of the way that I coded it, the dots mean the students are fine, but this warning, I put that warning in there when a student feels like they need help. So I know that I need to put this student in a breakout room, or maybe I need to use the written feedback in Desmos to be able to communicate with that student on what it is they need help with. All right, so what I did on slide 5 is now if you notice there are 1, 2, 3, 4 components. So what happens on this one is a reflection. So I'm still hoping that students are going to be honest about how they feel about something, because at the end of the day, they can still lie to me. They can still say, yeah, I feel like I can do these things. I'm great. In which case there's a dot. So you're still not going to have any idea if they had something that they didn't understand because they're failing to use that way of communicating with you. But if they choose false, now if you notice when I choose false, I can't do these things. A warning is going to appear in the dashboard. So again, I know that this student told me that they need help. But then also I made this appear where it says, use this space to tell me what you need help with. And I started a sentence for them, I need help. So my hope is that they're going to then explain to me what they need help with. So when I go to work with that kid, they've had that ability to alert me with what they need help with before I actually start working with them. All right, so again, a bunch of things happen. True, a dot appears. False, a warning appears, and I give them space to tell me what they need help with. So in this multiple choice, and I didn't code either of these as wrong or correct because there is no right or wrong answer. There's just, when you choose false, that's going to alert me to something. So false is where the warning is going to come in. So the warning is when this is selected, choice 2, the warning's going to say this student needs help. Otherwise, nothing is going to be said. And then when it comes to what you're putting here, it really doesn't matter what you're putting there. It's about you. So like you wouldn't see this if you chose this. This is just something that appears on my dashboard. And so when I hover over it, it's going to remind me of the note I wanted to tell myself. All right. The next thing that happened is, again, if they chose false, they can't do it, they need help with something, I made these 2 things appear. All right, well, you can't make something appear. You can make something be hidden until something happens. What I mean by that is there's this note where I gave the directions, use this space to tell me what you need help with. I wanted this to show up when they chose option 2. So if they have not chosen option 2, I'm never going to see this. So that means that this is hidden when multiple choice 4, and that was the component that I labeled as multiple choice 4. So when multiple choice 4 option 2, when it is not selected, everything's going to remain hidden. Same thing with the text input. I gave them the initial text, I need help. I mean, if you want to give them a different sentence starter, that's totally fine. But then this is also hidden when multiple choice option 2 is not selected. So nothing's happening, nothing's happening. I chose option 1. I did not choose 2, so that other stuff didn't appear. I did chose 2, so it's no longer hidden, and I get the warning. Any questions about that?
That's nifty.
Yes,
No,
it is.
I like hidden. Hidden's nice.
Yes, it is nice. All right, I do want to alert at one thing, and the reason why I use the coding of not. All right, because let's say I want it hidden when multiple choice 2 is selected. I'm sorry, when multiple choice 1. So like, and this is why sometimes you have to use not something, because right now it says that it will be hidden when option 1 is chosen, but if you notice, it appears when I haven't chosen anything. Yeah. So that's why I want to use the word not multiple choice 2, because that prevents this from appearing before a student chooses anything. So I'm going to go back to what it was before. That way, again, no one's chosen anything, so nothing is there. All right. Let's take a look at slide 6. So slide 6, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Have you been able to make that kind of CL work with checkboxes where there are multiple choice multiple answers?
What do you mean?
Well, you have the when this is selected, option 2. Mm-hmm. If you typed in this is selected with option 2, or this is selected, or and like put a whole set of commands at CL in that parentheses, will it still do the same thing?
Yep, it will.
Okay.
And if you get to a point where, like, if you start putting in multiple things, like using or, like if you notice whoops, that's not where it was. It was in here where I chose not this. If you leave off a set of parentheses, because what starts to get tricky is if you do a bunch of things and then you start saying or and you put in other stuff, if you leave off a parenthesis, like it's going to give you a little hint that like you have forgotten something. So you do have to start paying attention to parentheses when you start doing not and or and all that stuff. So just be on the lookout for that. But it will alert you if you're missing something. All right, on slide 6, so this one was just a basic multiple choice question. There was another cover text, so this was, again, section 2. You're going to be dealing with numerically identifying slope and y-intercept. Okay, I'm going to get started. So slope and y-intercept using the equation of a line. So this one is just straightforward. Either you get it wrong, you get it right, you get it wrong, or there's a warning. So one thing to start thinking about with warnings, because I had this question yesterday of, can you set multiple warnings? Yes, you can. So like here, the slope was -3 and the y-intercept was 4. So I know that students might mix that up and say 4x minus 3. And so that was option 4. So the warning is when they select option 4, they mixed up where the slope and y-intercept go. And that's a when statement. Anytime you use whens, you can do multiple things. When this happens, I want this to be the message. When this happens, I want this to be the message. Otherwise, no message. The thing to be careful of is, why are you using a warning to begin with? So like, for example, on slide 6, let's say these 3 kids all had warnings. The way that I set it up, I made the warning be for one thing. You mixed up the slope and y-intercept. So right away I can look at this and I can say only one person messed up the thing I know they're going to mess up. If you put a warning for each answer choice, you would have to hover over each person on the dashboard to see what the warning message is. So you have to ask yourself, is the warning to tell me they got it wrong? Or is the warning because I'm looking out for a specific wrong thing so I know which kids I want to work with? Which leads me to slide 7 in 4 minutes. But what I do want to show you before I go into like all of the crazy stuff that I had to do to make this work, I do at least want to show you the student-facing warning where you can tell them, yeah, you can give them a right message and a wrong message, but you also can give them a warning. So like, for example, on this one, I asked for the y-intercept. And up here, I said, be sure to write the y-intercept as an ordered pair. So here is the y-intercept, but of course we know sometimes kids don't read directions, or they read directions but they still don't follow it. And so for the y-intercept, instead of saying 0, 1, they might just say 1. Well, they haven't done what I want them to do, so I made a warning appear to say enter the ordered pair as XY. So you're not seeing a warning in the dashboard because this is something that me as the teacher, I just want to know that they got it wrong. But I do want to give a warning to the kid to alert them to write it as an ordered pair. So how I did that, you're about to see a lot again. That happened right
the error message
here. Yep. So, and this is how you do it. So this is where I did the student warning. And so that was a cell error message. So the cell was cell 22. And the error message I wanted to be is, I'm going to explain where this came from, but when the student doesn't write it as an ordered pair, this is going to be the message that pops up. But you can make it be anything you want. So like whatever it is that you're doing to give the student facing warning, use the cell error message. Whereas if you want the dashboard warning, you actually type in the word warning. All right, so I do want to go through the different things that are happening on this graph. So when I preview it, we're going to pay attention to what's happening in the dashboard. Everything that's coming in as correct or incorrect is based on what's happening in the table. Therefore, in the graph, I had to put the read-only true because I don't want Desmos to think something correct is coming from the graph. All right, so I want to do the slope. And the slope is up 1/2. So I've done a couple things here also. Right now there's an X in the dashboard because I'm not finished yet. So an X might appear not just because the student's wrong, but also maybe because they haven't finished yet. So that's where the dashboard also comes in. So like Stefan is in here. So if it shows up as an X, I don't really care until I see that they've moved to the next slide. So once they move to the next slide, then I care about what's here because it will update with if it was supposed to be an X or a check. So another thing, I don't know if you notice anything else about what's happening here, but a lot of the time, well, all of the time, unless you do the coding that I'm about to show you, if you type a fraction in here, it's going to end up saying what it equals as a decimal. But I know that, like, as a teacher, I care about kids being able to do slope as a fraction, so I disabled the fact that it evaluated it as a decimal. And I'll show you how to do that. So again, the y-intercept, if they type in 1, it's coded as wrong because that's not what I'm looking for. I want them to be able to write it as a y-intercept. So here's the student-facing warning that says you need to enter this as an ordered pair. So one thing that I know a kid might do is they might mix it up and say, oh, that's 1, 0. So that's the warning that I've set for myself, is if they type it in the wrong order, a warning is going to appear because that's the misconception that I care about. And so, like, me as a teacher, when I was creating this activity, I had to think to myself, a warning is going to appear. So on slide 7, I have 1 warning, but let's say it was like slide 9 where there's 3. I had to think about, what do I care more about as a teacher? Do I care about the warning popping up because they mixed up these 2 numbers? Or did I care about them choosing the wrong intercept? And that's where it's really up to you. For me, if they chose -2, 0, I don't want a warning. I just want to know they got it wrong. I care about, did you mix up the order of the numbers? And you might feel differently, in which case you can change what you want the warning to be.
Yeah.
But if they type in 0, 1, then a check mark appears on the dashboard. So that check mark is going to show up once they get both of these correct, because I've coded it that way. All right, so now how I made all of these things happen. So I wanted to code 1/2 as correct in this cell. I wanted to code 0, 1 as correct in this cell. I also did not want the decimal to appear, but I also have to do something kind of crazy to make it check an ordered pair, because you can't just type this in and have it check it as correct. You have to do some special Desmos coding language. All right, so all of that information comes right here. So this is a function called parse ordered pair. And so what this is doing, by parsing the ordered pair, we're splitting it up to the x value and the y value. So this is my way of telling Desmos that I'm looking for an ordered pair, but I have to say this is what the x value of the ordered pair is. This is what the y value of the ordered pair is. So I have to define my ordered pair anyway. So I started by setting a variable and saying that my pair, so my ordered pair, is equal to the parse ordered pair. And this is something where I chose my pair to be the variable. Since I already chose it once, like let's say I had 2 ordered pairs that it needed to check, I can just say my pair 1 equals, and then when I start typing parse ordered pair, it comes up for me. So I don't have to really remember how to type all that, I just have to know I'm doing it. And where my parse ordered pair is coming from is it's happening in this cell. So this is cell 22. So my pair is equal to the parse ordered pair that's happening this, because it's in this table, dot cell content 22, because it's the content within the cell 22. So a bunch of things are happening with this. Number 1, my student warning is coming from, you didn't actually write it as an ordered pair. So when and then is undefined is a function of Desmos. So like, because it's not being defined as an ordered pair. So when is undefined, that pops up as an option. And what's undefined is my pair. So when that is undefined, the warning the students are getting is you need to enter this as an ordered pair. Otherwise, they don't get a warning. So if they go in and they say -2, 0, even though they're wrong, they're not being told they're wrong, but they're also not given a warning. So this is where you could give multiple warnings directed to the student. Me as the teacher, I'm going to know they're wrong regardless. Maybe I want to say when they do -2, 0, I want to give them the warning that they've given me the wrong intercept. So I'm going to give another when. So when, now I'm talking about a specific ordered pair, which is coming from a number. So there's a numerical value. So when the numeric value, and I have to say my pair because that's what I define as the ordered pair, but then I need to say .x because I'm defining what the x value needs to be. So if their x value is -2 and the numeric value from their pair of the y value equals 0, I can say this is the x.
You're wrong. This is an x-intercept, yeah.
Otherwise, they're not getting anything. So now when a student does it, if they type in 1, their warning is entered as an ordered pair. You still see an x, or they can type -2, 0. Oops. All right, you gave me the x-intercept, but as the teacher, I still just see they're wrong. So when it comes to giving multiple warnings, you can give different types of warnings to kids, but I would still suggest only having one warning appear in the dashboard. And again, that came from if they mixed up the x. So where that comes in is the warning on the dashboard is when the numeric value of their pair, the x value was 1 and the numeric value of their y coordinate was 0, that's when I want to tell myself they switched the x and the y. Otherwise, I'm not getting a warning on the dashboard. Then there was the correctness feature, and then the disable the 1/2 showing up as 0.5. So first, the correctness on the dashboard. It is correct if they've done 2 things correctly. They've given me the correct slope and they've given me the correct ordered pair. So the correct ordered pair, I have to say that the numeric value of the x value was 0 and the numeric value of the y coordinate was 1 has to be true, and the slope has to equal 0.5. Right now, the students are not seeing 0.5. This is how I have to code it in Desmos, because Desmos, you can't say this cell numeric value equaled 1/2. You have to give it as a decimal. Yeah. So like, and then the other one is keeping Desmos from showing them the decimal. So I'm gonna get rid of this for a second so you see that. So if I type in 1/2, automatically Desmos is going to say that equals 0.5, but maybe you don't want students to see that. And this also is true if it's a case where, like, let's say you're not even doing slope and y-intercept. Let's just say you have a table and they're like evaluating expressions or something. And automatically it's going to evaluate it, but you can get rid of that feature so that's not happening. So that's where you can keep Desmos from showing the decimal part. So I'm just going to get rid of this and show you from the beginning. So within that cell, you want to disable the evaluation. So cell and then disable evaluation. Where I want it to be disabled is in this cell. So that's row 1, column 2. So cell 1, 2. And I'm going to say true, I want that to happen. So now, like, again, if it was an evaluating expressions or whatever, it's not evaluating it. Yeah. So when they type in the 1/2, they're not seeing the 0.5 anymore.
Cool.
So a lot of stuff happened on this slide. Do you have any questions?
No, I do. I am following this. Like, I get this.
Okay, cool. And then
all of my feedback previously has been in the content, in the display above, and not necessarily in the warning. So that's a lot more helpful, so I can give specific warnings and not just general based on the slew of possible mistakes that are going to happen on this slide.
Yeah. And yeah, again, that's where, like, again, between what was happening on the dashboard versus what was happening in the table, it's what do I want to know, but what do I want them to know? And those are the things that you have to decide. So then the last thing I did was on the reflection. And so, you know, this is something also that I had to talk through with someone just to like get my thoughts of, if I was the teacher, what am I looking for? So on this one, with this reflection, I'm confident in my ability to do all of these things. And so that's why I also titled the slides in a specific way. So like slide 7, they did it using a graph. Slide 8, they did it using a table. Oops. Slide 6 was something. What was 6? 6 was from the equation of a line, so that they could go back and say, I feel comfortable with this. I feel comfortable with this. I feel comfortable with this, or I need help on all of these. So if you notice what's happening in the dashboard, the way I coded this one was if they said, I need help just from an equation, it came up as wrong. So what that's telling me as a teacher is if they don't need help on any of these and they haven't done anything. Wait, why did the check mark appear? Hold on a second.
That's me, actually.
Boom, boom, boom. Okay.
This is Stefan.
Oh, it's because it's not saying they need help. I made it be just, I can do this. So a kid says, I can do this, this, and this. If they can do all three, a check mark appeared. So I know that they're good because I made it be such a way that I technically said these are the correct answers. Because if you chose that, you're good to go and I don't need to help you. So I want to know what students are good on all three of them. So I know that this kid doesn't need help with anything at all. Whereas if you only say you're good at an equation, that means you weren't good at these two things. So I made that be an X because you were good at something, but you couldn't do everything. So again, you're good at something, but you can't do these things. If you check all three, you can do all of them. I don't know why a kid would want to check every single one of these because you're telling me you can do all of these, but you also need help on all of these. So that's either a kid that's not paying attention to the directions, or maybe they really do need help on all of these. And that's where I made the warning appear. So I know, again, if an X came up, you might need help with one or two things, but if a warning comes up, you need help with everything. So if I look at my dashboard, I can say, oh gosh, these three kids, they need help with everything. I need to somehow do some sort of small group remediation or do some sort of reteaching or something because so many kids need help with everything. Whereas with these, I would need to go and look at them specifically and say, okay, they need help with the table. All right, so I think with that, the only coding, that I had to do is I checked these to be correct. Again, saying if they chose all of those, they're good. And then the warning just came up when they chose option 4. So when the fourth option was selected, they need help with everything. All right, so that was everything on here. Do you have any further questions for anything you were thinking about but haven't asked so far?
I was interested in your read-only. To basically have Desmos ignore certain components in the CL when it's trying to check for work. I've had it sometimes when I've typed in the read-only that I get a warning and it won't run it as it's as a command in Desmos.
Do you know which component you put it in? Because it can't be used in every component and it doesn't have to be used in every component. Okay. So like for example, let's say.
So if it's like a note text or anything like that, you shouldn't need a read-only. Desmos is not looking at it anyway.
Well, not that you shouldn't. So let's say here. So I'm going to show you through multiple choice because I'm in a multiple choice component. I've checked this as being correct. All right, now if I go in and I hit correct, a dot appears, incorrect, and X appears because of the fact that they have to do an explanation. All right, now in kind of going back to what I said on the first slide, anytime they have to put text somewhere, you don't have the option of making it read only and you don't have the option of making a check appear. So like if you want a check to actually appear, do not ask them to explain their answer. So correct is a check, incorrect is an X. That might have been. And if you added text input, now if you choose the correct answer, it's a dot, incorrect is still an X. What you can't do is on this one, you cannot do read only. You're not allowed to do that in this component. So that's why you're getting that message because it's not allowed to be done through that component. In a note, you don't have to because students, so like the reason why you might think you want to do it on this one is because students are typing things. So Desmos know that students are actually interacting with that piece and they're putting their thinking in there somewhere. So you can't say read only on this, but Desmos still knows that it's happening. When you put a note in, students don't interact with a note. This is just for directions. So students don't do anything with this except look at it. So you don't have to put the read-only text in there because students aren't doing anything with it. When it comes to math input, students would be putting something in there. So now when I checked correct, it's a dot. But this one I can, I'm pretty sure, yep, make read only. So now that's true. So Desmos isn't going to check it for student work. So now when they check correct, there's going to be a check mark.
I think I had a program once where a student was entering information that was editing a graph, or the graph was showing up on the, it might have been the graph component.
Yeah, graph components you have to do is read only.
That their interaction was showing their graph of what they were typing in so that they could kind of evaluate whether or not they were on track.
So you're saying they were typing, so they were putting something in here, and then what they were typing was appearing on the graph.
Yes.
Yeah, so you would, if it's not checking for correctness in either of these two places, so like if you have the graph in there, you would want this to be read only, and you would want this to be read only. Or like, let's say in here, so like, let's say that I'm going to give it initial latex. So this one is initial or latex. I honestly don't know how to pronounce that. Like, let's say you want to start with the y equals for them, so that y equals is there. And let's say you want to check here, but you don't also want to check the graph. So I'm going to code what is correct. So correct is this latex is, and then in my math type, let's just say like the correct answer was y equals x. And those little backticks are what's making it appear as math type. So now, whoops, but now in my graph, I want it to be read only so that it doesn't try to look there for an answer. So now correct, y equals x, still correct. But if I put like y equals 2x, dang it, I've done something wrong. Let's do, I think maybe I just needed this. This is me sometimes like having to play around to figure out what I was supposed to be doing. So y equals x is correct. Why is that still marking it as correct?
And I think this might have been what it is I was trying to get that check mark to show up, and I wanted certain components to stop being labeled as correct or incorrect. This latex, y equals x. It should be in the math type.
Oh, what's happening?
Should it be this latex in parentheses, or is it the dot?
No, it should be the dot. Let me try doing it. I wonder if it's because I didn't. Oh my gosh, it's because it's read only. Okay, there we go. Make sure you pay attention to that. So I'm going to go back to saying correct, and then y equals x. Now it's all correct, but if they put y equals 2x, now it's wrong. But if you don't put read only in the graph,
it keeps trying to read the graph.
Yeah, so it'll still just be a dot. It'll still say it's wrong, but it won't say that it's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then if you were to throw in another checkbox or an ordered list or a sketch, these components where students are interacting with that component, that's where you have to put read only.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you for participating. It was nice to have some new people today.